I never thought refusing a drink could cost me my job. That Thursday evening when my manager slid the invitation across the table, "Come on, join us for a few rounds," I just shook my head, plain and simple, no fuss. The next morning my desk was cleared, my nameplate gone, just like that. One moment I was part of the team, the next I was a ghost in the office hallway. I stood there silent, feeling the sting of betrayal, wondering how quiet defiance could lead to such a sharp fall. By the way, before we dive in, tell me in the comments, ever seen someone get the revenge they really deserved? I read all of them. Hey, while you're here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's continue. My name's Evelyn Hart, 32 years of living tucked between the bustle of city life and the quiet ache of dreams deferred. For 5 years, I'd been the client relations manager at Hallberg & Co., a modest firm with big ambitions, where my days spilled over with meetings, calls, and the delicate art of persuasion. I liked it there, liked the rhythm of the work and the faint sense of making a difference. Outside the office, my life was simpler. A small apartment with a view of the elm tree down the street, Sunday dinners with my mother, and an old tabby cat named Mr. Whiskers who regarded me with unimpressed tolerance. That Thursday night, the one that changed everything, I was the only one who declined the round of drinks after a hard day's work. It wasn't that I disliked a good drink, far from it. I just didn't like the way those client socials often turned into a parade of boozy one-upmanship, where deals got whispered over too many shots and promises slurred into the night. I told my manager, Tom, that I had an early morning and wasn't feeling up to it. I don't think he liked the answer. But the real trouble didn't start there. I saw it creeping, little shadows in the corners of conversations and sideways glances when I passed by. The way Sarah, my closest colleague, would suddenly look away when I approached, or how Mr. Jenkins from accounts stopped making eye contact. One afternoon, as I was leaving a meeting, Tom's voice stopped me in the hallway. "Eve," he said, using the nickname only I liked, "clients don't just want contracts, they want connection. You gotta loosen up, show them you're one of the gang." "I connect just fine," I said, smiling thinly. "Without the drinks." He laughed, but it was hollow, like a man rehearsing a joke he didn't believe. "Suit yourself, but business isn't just business, it's life." I nodded and walked on, the weight of those words settling on my shoulders like a damp coat. At home that night, Mr. Whiskers jumped onto my lap as I poured a cup of chamomile tea instead of wine. I stared out the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. Something was shifting beneath the surface at Hallberg & Co., and I was caught in the undertow. The next few weeks were a quiet storm. Tom began scheduling meetings without me, citing team realignments. Emails that once landed in my inbox were now routed elsewhere. When I asked Sarah about it, she avoided my eyes, murmuring, "You know how it is, they want to keep things smooth." Smooth, it felt more like a slow push out the door, but I wasn't blind. Every cancelled lunch, every postponed call, every curt reply was a stitch in a tapestry I was starting to see clearly. If they thought I'd just fade away, they were mistaken. I started turning my attention elsewhere, reading industry reports, memorizing client preferences from public filings, and revisiting old presentations I'd given at conferences. At the neighborhood cafe, I found myself lingering longer with the barista, picking up the names of new startups and ventures. At the bookstore, I leafed through business strategy books as if they were secret manuals. One evening, at a small networking event I attended alone, I overheard a group talking about Hallberg's latest merger talks and their shaky client loyalty. They mentioned how a rival company, Sterling & Finch, had been quietly courting some of Hallberg's biggest accounts. My ears perked up. The seed of a plan took root that night, not from anger but from resolve. If I was going to be pushed out, I would not vanish quietly. I would learn, I would prepare, and one day I'd come back in a way they wouldn't see coming. That winter, when the city streets were slick with rain and the days grew short, I kept to my quiet routines but worked in the shadows. I reached out to a few former clients, not with grand promises but gentle check-ins, honest conversations about their needs and frustrations. Some responded with guarded warmth, others were too wrapped up in their current contracts to reply. But I collected each word, each nuance, as if they were pieces of a puzzle only I could solve. I marked the subtle dissatisfaction hidden beneath professional smiles, the gaps where Hallberg's promises had failed. Tom's words echoed in my mind. Clients want connection. I resolved to offer them something deeper, a connection built on respect and understanding, not forced camaraderie over cheap drinks. One afternoon, I bumped into Sarah at a coffee shop. She hesitated when she saw me, fingers tightening around her cup. "Eve," she said softly, "I heard about the changes." I nodded. "I'm figuring things out." She glanced around, lowered her voice. "Be careful, Tom's got eyes everywhere." "Thanks for the warning," I replied, smiling with the kind of calm that only comes from quiet preparation. As the days turned into months, I watched from the sidelines as Halberg struggled to keep their footing. Meanwhile, I built connections, not flashy or loud, but steady and sincere. I wasn't just waiting. I was readying myself for the moment when silence would give way to action. And that moment, I knew, was coming. The morning came on with the usual drizzle, gray skies hanging low over the city like a wet blanket. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my second cup of coffee when the call came through. It wasn't the usual friendly ring from a client or a casual catch-up from an old colleague. No, this was different. It buzzed with that cold, mechanical tone that's all too familiar when life wants to deliver a hard lesson. "Evelyn Hart," the voice was clipped, businesslike. "This is Linda from Halberg & Co. Human Resources." I set my mug down, feeling the ceramic grow cold in my hands. "We're calling to inform you that your position has been terminated effective immediately." My mouth went dry. I blinked, trying to digest the words as if they were strange foreign language. Terminated, just like that. "Unfortunately, yes, company restructuring," she said, as if reciting a script she'd uttered 1,000 times before. I ended the call, heart pounding in a rhythm that wasn't my own. The apartment seemed suddenly too small, the walls pressing in. I sat back, hands clutching the edge of the table, trying to breathe. 3 years of loyalty, of late nights and early mornings, folded up and tossed away like yesterday's newspaper. Later that day, I packed a small bag and left the apartment. I didn't need to stay there and stew in the bitter juices of betrayal. I wandered the streets, rain slicking the sidewalks, the city around me a blur of faces and umbrellas. Every step felt heavier than the last, each one sinking me deeper into a pit I hadn't seen coming. At a quiet cafe, I found an empty corner and ordered a black coffee. The barista, a cheerful fellow named Joe, noticed my forlorn look. "Bad day." "You could say that," I murmured. Joe nodded knowingly. "Sometimes they throw you out to see if you'll come back stronger." I managed a faint smile. "I hope you're right." It was then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah. The message was brief. "If you want to talk, meet me at the park bench near 5th, 4 p.m. I glanced at the clock, plenty of time. When I arrived at the park, the chill in the air bit through my coat, but the familiar bench under the old oak tree felt like a tiny island of calm. Sarah was already there, hands stuffed in her pockets, face tight with worry. "Eve," she began hesitantly, "I'm sorry about how things ended." I shrugged, sitting down beside her. "It's done. What I don't understand is why they pushed me out for refusing a drink." Sarah looked around before leaning closer. "It's not just about the drinks. Tom's got this idea that loyalty means socializing, playing their games. You didn't play along, so you didn't belong." I sighed. I never thought saying no would cost me everything. "Most don't," she said softly. "But it's the way things are." We sat in silence for a moment, the rustling leaves overhead sounding like whispered secrets. Then Sarah added, "Listen, there's talk that Sterling and Finch might scoop up some of our biggest clients. If you're thinking what I'm thinking." I met her eyes, the fire lighting again. "I am." The days after that call were a whirlwind. I found myself standing at crossroads where every path seemed shadowed. I wasn't the type to panic or lash out. But inside, something simmered, a steady flame that refused to be snuffed. One afternoon, I stopped by the office. Not to plead or rage, but to see. The receptionist gave me a cold look, but I smiled, unbothered. "Just here to collect my things," I said. "They've been packed," she said curtly, handing me a box of forgotten memories, old reports, a framed photo from the last Christmas party, a worn-out planner with scribbled notes. I ran my fingers over the contents, a silent farewell to a chapter closed too soon. Walking away, I felt the sting of loss, but also the stirrings of something new. The city stretched out before me like a canvas waiting for bold strokes. I wasn't sure what the next painting would look like, but I was ready to pick up the brush. That night, the rain tapped a steady rhythm on my window pane as I sat with Mr. Whiskers curled beside me. I whispered to him, "They think I'm down for the count. They don't know I'm just getting started." The words felt good, a promise whispered into the dark. And so, with the world turning and the rain falling, I stood at the edge of a new beginning, the future uncertain but mine to shape. What they took from me, I vowed, I would earn back tenfold, not through forced camaraderie but through something stronger. resilience, strategy, and quiet strength. In the weeks that followed my dismissal, I found myself pacing a different path, one where quiet determination replaced shock and confusion. I wasn't one to sit around waiting for fate to take a turn. No, I set about building my own. First order of business was knowing my enemy, or at least understanding the terrain. Hallberg and Co. hadn't fired me just out of spite. There was something more calculated behind their move. So I began gathering what pieces of the puzzle I could reach. One brisk Saturday morning, I slipped into a little cafe near the old courthouse, a place frequented by clients, lawyers, and business folk alike. I took my usual seat by the window, pulled out a worn leather folder, and began sifting through brochures, public filings, and news clippings I'd clipped over months. It was slow work, the kind that demanded patience and a keen eye. Joe, the barista with the easy smile, brought over my coffee without a word, but with a look that said, "Back at it, huh?" I grinned, "You bet, a woman's gotta have a plan." He winked and wandered off, leaving me to my scheming. In the background of that quiet space, I overheard a conversation between two men at the next table. They spoke in low tones about Hallberg's client attrition and Sterling's aggressive outreach. I caught phrases about a recent slip in service satisfaction and whispered complaints about a certain manager, Tom, no doubt. I leaned in slightly, pretending to check my notes but catching every word. Later that week, I arranged a casual meeting with Henry Douglas, a former client who'd always been courteous but distant. We met for lunch at a modest bistro downtown, his face guarded but polite. "Evelyn," Henry said, stirring his coffee slowly, "I have to admit, since you left, things haven't been quite the same with Hallberg. There's been some turbulence." I nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry to hear that. What's changed?" He hesitated, glanced around. "Let's just say Tom's way of connecting hasn't resonated with everyone. Some clients feel pressured, uncomfortable even, and it's trickled down." That was the opening I needed. "Have you considered exploring other options?" I asked softly. Henry smiled faintly. "You know I have, but the loyalty. It's hard to break." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Sometimes loyalty is more about the person than the company." He studied me a moment, the flicker of old trust sparking between us. Meanwhile, I kept my ears to the ground. I slipped into seminars, industry mixers, and even a charity gala or two, all under the guise of networking. I listened more than I spoke, storing away tidbits and whispers that painted a clearer picture of Hallberg's cracks. One evening, I found myself at a conference where Sterling and Finch was unveiling a new client relations strategy. The keynote speaker was a sharp woman named Claire Martin, known for her innovative approach and no-nonsense style. After the talk, I introduced myself. "Claire, I'm Evelyn Hart," I said, extending my hand. "I admire your work." She shook my hand firmly, her eyes steady. "Thank you, Evelyn. Always good to meet fellow professionals who believe in substance over style." We spoke briefly, and I mentioned my background, careful not to reveal too much. Yet something in her response warmed me. "If you're ever looking for new opportunities, Sterling's always scouting talent who know what real client care means." A seed planted. Back at my apartment, I spread out the materials I'd gathered, reports showing client complaints, notes from conversations, snippets from news articles, even some internal memos that had found their way into the public domain. Each piece was a thread in a tapestry I was weaving, one that would someday be undeniable. At times, I met with Sarah, who had her own reservations and helpful insights. One rainy afternoon, she brought over a folder thick with client feedback and whispered gossip. "Tom's trying to spin the narrative," she said, shoving the folder across the table. "But cracks show. I think you've got something here." I smiled, eyes gleaming with purpose. "We're going to show them what happens when you underestimate a quiet woman." One evening, Joe popped by my apartment with a stack of business magazines. "Thought you might find these handy," he said with a grin. "Joe, you're a gem," I said, flipping through pages on corporate strategy and leadership. As the weeks rolled on, I organized my thoughts, laid out possible approaches, and mapped client relationships like a general preparing for battle. Every meeting, every conversation, every carefully saved document was a brick in my fortress. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my place, proving that integrity and intelligence were worth more than cheap drinks and forced laughter. And as I looked out at the city skyline from my small balcony, Mr. Whiskers perched on my lap, I whispered to myself, "Soon they'll see. Not just who I was, but who I am becoming." The pieces were falling into place, and the quiet storm I had been preparing was about to break. The day I decided to step out of the shadows and into the light felt both ordinary and extraordinary, as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. I had the evidence, the plan, and most importantly, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've done your homework better than anyone else. It was a Monday morning when I walked into Sterling and Finch's glass-walled offices for my interview. Claire Martin greeted me in the lobby, her smile both warm and sharp. "Evelyn," she said, "we've been expecting you. Let's get to work." There wasn't much to say, the air buzzed with possibility. What followed wasn't just an interview. It was a meeting of minds. I laid out what I'd gathered, the client dissatisfaction at Hallberg, the cracks in their facade, the opportunity Sterling and Finch had to seize what was theirs for the taking. Claire listened intently, nodding as I spoke, the wheels turning visibly in her eyes. "You've done your homework," she said when I finished, "and you've got the kind of insight we need. I want you on my team." That very week, I found myself contacting former clients, not with desperation, but with the quiet assurance of someone who knew their needs and had solutions. The conversations were measured, respectful. One afternoon, I spoke with Henry Douglas again, this time over lunch at a quaint bistro. He greeted me with a smile that held a touch of relief. "Evelyn," he said, raising his glass, "I'm glad you called. Things have been tense at Hallberg." I smiled back. "They've been changing, Henry, but change can be good." Our talk flowed easily, and by the time dessert arrived, Henry was nodding towards Sterling and Finch's brochures spread across the table. "I think we're ready for something new." The momentum was building. Meanwhile, back at Hallberg, word began to spread. I could hear whispers through Sarah and other contacts, murmurs of surprise, unease, even anger. Tom, once the towering presence who dismissed me, now seemed to be shrinking, his confident stride faltering. One day, as I attended a networking event with Claire and the team, I caught sight of him across the room. Our eyes met for a brief moment. He looked away quickly, but the message was clear, the tables had turned. But confrontation wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it came in the quiet moments. A week later, I received a call from Tom himself. "Evelyn," he said, voice tight, "I hear you've been busy." "I have," I replied evenly, "helping clients find what they really need." There was a pause. "Then you're making trouble. Or maybe I'm making progress." He scoffed, "Watch yourself. This industry isn't big enough for both of us." I chuckled softly. "It's bigger than you think. And I'm not here to fight, just to succeed." That call marked the beginning of a subtle battle. Tom and I crossed paths more often, each encounter a test of wills. At a trade show, I watched as he tried to charm clients with rehearsed lines, while I offered genuine conversations, building trust. One afternoon, Sarah called me, breathless with news. "Evelyn, there's chatter in the office. They're worried. Some of the big accounts are slipping." I leaned back, sipping my coffee. "That's what happens when you lose the human touch." "Tom's panicking," she added. "They're scrambling." I smiled, the taste of victory just on the horizon. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Sterling and Finch had arranged a client showcase at a swanky downtown venue. The room buzzed with anticipation, clients mingling, drinks flowing, but this time I noticed something different. The conversations were sincere, the connections real. As I spoke with a longtime Hallberg client, a man named Mr. Reynolds, he leaned in. "Evelyn, you've changed the game," he said quietly. "We've felt forgotten for years. Now it feels like someone finally listens." The warmth in his words was a balm to my weary soul. Later that evening, Claire pulled me aside. "You've done more than just bring clients," she said. "You've restored faith." I nodded, feeling the weight of her praise. It's not just about business, it's about respect. Back at Hallberg, the cracks widened. Tom was called into meetings where hushed voices questioned his leadership. Rumors swirled that the board was reconsidering their strategy and their people. One day, I received a message from Sarah, "Tom's on thin ice. Things are unraveling fast." The moment wasn't about gloating. It was about knowing that integrity, patience, and quiet strength had won the day. And through it all, I held onto a simple truth. Sometimes, the fiercest battles aren't fought with noise and fury, but with calm resolve and a well-laid plan. As I stood by the window of my new office at Sterling and Finch, watching the city lights flicker to life, I whispered to Mr. Whiskers curled at my feet, "We're just getting started." The wheels I'd set in motion began turning faster than I'd dared hope. At Sterling and Finch, the air was electric with purpose. Not the forced cheerfulness of Hallberg's client socials, but a genuine eagerness that came from building something real. Claire trusted me, and with every call I made, every meeting I arranged, I felt the shift from silent preparation to bold action. One crisp morning, I sat across from Mr. Reynolds at a sunlit cafe. He smiled as I laid out Sterling's new client-focused approach. "Evelyn, I must admit, this feels like a breath of fresh air. I'm tired of being just another number," he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. I leaned in. "That's exactly what we're fixing. No more empty promises, just honest partnership." He chuckled, "You're a rare breed." That moment wasn't just business, it was redemption. Word spread quickly among the clients I'd reached out to. Meetings multiplied, contracts were revisited, and soon familiar names began reappearing on Sterling's client list. It wasn't flashy or boastful, it was steady, consistent, and deeply satisfying. Back at the office, Claire called a team meeting. The conference room buzzed with quiet excitement. "Evelyn's efforts have brought us over 50% of the former Halberg clients in just 3 months, she announced, eyes gleaming. "That's not just a win, it's a game changer." Applause filled the room, but I stayed seated, the satisfaction quietly blooming inside. During the celebrations, Sarah came up to me, eyes shining. "You've turned the tide." "I knew you would." I smiled, grateful for her support. It was never about proving them wrong, it was about doing right by the clients. Despite the successes, challenges surfaced. Some clients hesitated, wary of change. At one meeting, a skeptical executive from a long-held account crossed his arms. "How do I know this isn't just another sales pitch?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because this time you're not just a client, you're a partner. And I'm here to listen, not just sell." That honesty broke down walls faster than any fancy presentation. As contracts rolled in, I found my confidence growing alongside my responsibilities. I wasn't just the woman who'd been fired anymore, I was the one steering a vital part of Sterling's growth. At home, Mr. Whiskers seemed to approve of the change, curling more often on my lap as I worked late into the evening, phone by my side. One night I caught myself laughing aloud at a client's joke during a call. "Look at you, having fun," Joe teased when I dropped by the cafe for a quick coffee. I grinned. Feels good to be back in the game on my own terms. The balance between work and life began to settle into a rhythm. I started taking Sunday hikes with Sarah, our conversations ranging from business plans to shared memories of Halberg's cold corridors. One afternoon, while reviewing a client proposal, Claire stopped by my desk. "You've done more than bring clients back, you've reshaped how we think about service here." I looked up surprised. "I just wanted to do better." She laughed softly, and better is exactly what we needed. The city outside my office window was alive with possibility, and so was I. The plan I'd quietly nurtured had blossomed into reality, the initial results not just promising but proof of what steady resolve and genuine care could accomplish. As I wrapped up a call with a new client, I sat back, letting the satisfaction wash over me. "This is just the beginning," I told Mr. Whiskers, who blinked slowly in agreement. And indeed, the future looked brighter than any drink ever had. The tide had turned unmistakably. Halberg & Co., once so confident and unshakable, was now navigating rough waters. Rumors of lost clients and faltering leadership buzzed louder with each passing day. Sarah, ever the bearer of news from the inside, met me one afternoon at our favorite cafe, concern etched on her face. "Eve," she said quietly, stirring her tea, "Tom's been called into some serious meetings. The board's not happy." I nodded, a quiet satisfaction warming me. They let him take shortcuts and ignore the clients. Now they're paying the price. Sarah sighed. "It's more than that. They're trying damage control, sending new reps, promising changes, but the trust is gone." That trust, I knew, wasn't something money could buy back overnight. It was the very thing I'd spent months rebuilding with Sterling and Finch. Meanwhile, my role blossomed. I was no longer just a newcomer with a vendetta, I was a key player shaping company strategy. Claire and I strategized on expanding client services, introducing personalized approaches that made each client feel valued and heard. One evening, as I wrapped up a meeting with an important client, Henry Douglas, he smiled and said, "Evelyn, you've not only brought us here, but you've made us feel like we belong." I smiled back, feeling the weight and worth of those words. That's the kind of partnership we want, long-term, genuine. Financially, the progress was evident too. Bonuses came, new opportunities opened, and Sterling and Finch's reputation grew. I found myself mentoring younger team members, sharing the lessons from my journey, emphasizing integrity and resilience. Back at Halberg, the changes were more dramatic. Sarah confided one afternoon, "Tom's been let go. They're bringing in new management, but the damage is deep." I paused, taking in the news. Sometimes the roots have to be cut to grow anew. On a personal level, life had transformed. The shadow of betrayal no longer loomed over me. Instead, there was lightness in my step and purpose in my days. Mr. Whiskers still demanded his share of attention, curling beside me during late-night strategy sessions. One weekend, Sarah and I celebrated with a quiet dinner. To new beginnings, she toasted, glass raised. I clinked mine gently. And to knowing your worth. The journey had been long, but the lessons were clear. Resilience, preparation, and unwavering self-respect could turn even the harshest setbacks into stepping stones. And as I looked toward the horizon, I knew this was just the start of a brighter, stronger chapter. The past felt like a distant shore I'd finally sailed away from. Each morning, I woke not to the weight of what was lost, but to the lightness of what I'd gained. Sterling and Finch wasn't just a company anymore, it was my new home, a place where my voice mattered and my work bore fruit. One sunny afternoon, Sarah stopped by my office, carrying 2 cups of coffee like a peace offering. "Remember when we thought all was lost?" I laughed, taking a sip. "Seems like a lifetime ago." She smiled, settling into the chair. "You turned everything around, not with shouting or anger but with quiet strength." "That's the trick," I said softly. "Sometimes you win by being steady, by knowing when to speak and when to listen." Claire popped in just then, her eyes bright. "Evelyn, the board wants you to lead the new client relations division. You're not just attracting clients, you're shaping the future." I felt a swell of pride but kept my tone humble. "I'm ready for the challenge." That evening, standing by my apartment window, Mr. Whiskers perched on my shoulder, I whispered, "We did it, old friend." From silence to strength. I knew the road ahead was wide open, full of possibilities, challenges, and new victories. The story wasn't just about revenge or career success. It was about resilience, self-worth, and the quiet power of preparation. And if ever the past came knocking again, I'd meet it with the calm confidence of someone who's already won. After all, life's greatest lessons are learned in the moments we refuse to give up, and I was just getting started.